Hey YouTubers, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be changing the oil on the F800. So that should be pretty straightforward. There's a little bit of work to do. I'll show you in a second how we get to the oil filter and what we've got to do down there. But just before that, this is the oil and filter that I'm going to be putting in today. So 15W50 Castrol Active is the right grade for here in Australia. I'll put the grade ratings in the description, and a K&N KN160 filter is the go and the one that I used last time. So this is the 40,000 kilometer service. So I do my changes every 5,000 kilometers, and I find that's just a good distance for small engines. On the cars I tend to do 10,000. Okay, let's get into what we need to do to change it. So the oil filter itself sits there on the front of the engine. It's pretty easy to get off once you get access to it. Just unscrew it and get the new one on. And once we've done that, then we can get the oil drained as well and refilled. So the oil refill is through this dipstick here. So there's a way to check the oil on the engine. We'll show you that later. And then the first thing we need to do is to get the bash plate off. So to do that, there's four 13mm M13 bolts under there, not M13, sorry, 13mm heads, and we'll be getting those off. So there's two at the front there and two at the back, and then there's one other little tricky screw which is just in there, which is a Torx 40 I think it is. We'll just check that in a second, and you get that off and then you can drop the bash plate down. So I'll get those undone and get that bash plate loose and show you what those fixings look like. Okay, so we've got a bit of light on the scene and we've got those bolts out now. So these are the four 13mm nuts. They fit on those four pins there on the bottom of the bash plate. And this is the long bolt that goes through that front bracket. So it just goes through there. So that is a T45. T40 will do it, but a T45 is what you need. And it is a bit tricky to get out because you have to bring it out through this hole and you have to pull it out. Either wiggle it out or get a pair of pliers in there to pull that out. And then 13mm socket for those nuts. And those nuts are just on the bottom of the sump there. So you can just see the four fixings, so two at the front and two at the back, just molded into the sump itself. And that gives us access here to the drain plug, which is what we're going to work on next. So we'll get a hex drive to get that out and get that loose, and then also get the oil filter loose at the front there. This one, the K&N, it comes with a spanner or a socket size on the front, which is good for getting it out. Maybe don't use that to put it back in because you don't really want to break the paint there. So let's get on with that. Okay, so we've used this hex 10mm spanner to get the drain plug out, and it was really tight. So it is aluminium against aluminium, so I might just put something in there to try and make that a bit easier next time. The oil's draining down. Looks like we've already got around, a bit hard to see, just on 3 litres of oil dripping out, and I've just loosened the filter, so that's just dripping down on the housing there. We'll just get that off. Let that drain down. And one thing I did do before I started, I did warm the engine up to about 40 or 50 degrees Celsius, so that really helps the oil come out. You can see it's much more like water. And that's one good way to make sure you try and get all your old oil out, especially from the top of the engine. Okay, we'll let that finish off. We'll get that drain plug back in a second. One thing with the drain plug, I did put there is a magnet on here. I can't remember if I put this on or it was factory. I think it's factory on this one. You can see we have got quite a bit of metal on there. If I just dip that oil off. Not too bad, but that is probably a little bit more than you'd hope to see. So if you don't have a magnetic drain plug, highly recommend one. The last thing you want is that those little metal filings going around in your engine. It's the least you can do. There will always be wear on the engine, and this at least captures it before it gets round and has to try and get trapped in the filter. Okay, let's get that cleaned up as well. So I've just wiped that down, and as you can see, it's a factory magnet, all nice and clean now and ready to go back in. All right, so we've got the new filter back on. Interestingly, even though it's got the nut on it, it even says on the box not to use the nut for tightening. I just got it nice and tight by hand, and I did use the nut just to make sure it was tight. Same with the filler plug, just tightened that up and didn't do it quite as tight as before, didn't put any sealant on, just reuse the copper washer. A lot will say use a new copper washer, but if it's not leaking, shouldn't be a problem. They do crush a little bit, so they can eventually fail or get a little bit flat and leak. If it leaks, change the washer. And for the refill, just been refilling it now, got it to about 2 litres, 2.5 litres. I'll just take it up to near 3 litres and then dip it with the dipstick. The way you do that is drop it down onto the threads and then pull it out and see what it's looking like. All right, so all topped up now, and just to show you how you dip that, you just go like that, take it out, and I have gone a little bit over full. It's a bit hard to see where I'm at, so I'm just above the max there, but I'm not too fussed about that. It'll burn a little bit off. The one thing you do need to do is run the engine between when you're filling and when you finish, so that you fill the oil filter. Otherwise, you will lose about maybe 100 or 200 litres in the oil filter, and that will just change the oil reading. And the other thing on my bike, I've got the centre stand, so super easy, the bike's nice and level, and don't have any trouble about knowing where the level is. Okay, so that's about it. Thanks for watching. Hope that's useful to somebody. I'll get the sump guard back on and give it a bit of a wash, and we'll see how we go. So, all washed off and cleaned up a little bit. Bash plate back on, and 4 bolts tightened up, 4 nuts tightened up underneath. All good to go, and should be fine now for another 5,000 kilometers. Okay, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.